All right. Well, good evening, guys. Hare Krishna. Thank you for coming. Braving the cold. It's getting cold. It feels like winter, doesn't it? Yeah. And we had some snow yesterday. That was the best kind of snow. It snows and then it melts the next day. Best kind. Anyway, it just so happens I'm going after Rasa, which she did such a good job. I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to follow up with this? So I had her do the slides that way. It's just, yeah. Okay, so Bhakti Lab 101. I wonder what is this going to be about? Yeah. All right. So complete knowledge, right? So we've talked about this. As I talked to a lot of you guys tell me. The question I always ask is, what's the difference between education in India and then here? And what would you guys say is probably the biggest difference in going to like university in India than here?
Flexibility.
Flexibility. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Well, what I've heard is people say that theoretical knowledge is taught really well in India, but the major difference here is it's the practical piece that they add in here, whether it's laboratory or whatever, that really helps round out your education. So it's no different in spirituality. So you have the theoretical knowledge, which is the philosophy. And this semester, we went over the Bhagavad Gita's philosophy in pretty detail. And then what we've been working on the last couple of weeks is, okay, so where's the practical piece? And Rasa did a really good job last week talking about chanting as being the primary way of practicing the theoretical or the practical part, right? So I'm going to expand on that today. And we're going to talk about all the different ways that we can round off our full knowledge through what's available to us to really practice bhakti, right? So many of you guys say, okay, I grew up with some of this philosophy, and so this helps to kind of round it out for me, or put it in some sort of a compact packet that I can understand and say, okay, this is sequential, I get it. But so what's next? What do we do? How do we apply this knowledge? And that's what we're going to talk about today. And it's a very scientific method that the Gaudiya Sampradaya has. So many acharyas have written so many books, and so it's very precise. So very similar to whatever your curriculum in your majors are. You know how hey, you got to take these classes, you can pick this, you can pick that. It's the same concept. It's really, really amazing, actually, when you start to get into it. Who like to read novels? Well, you're probably in class, so you don't have time to do that, right? So I used to read a lot of fiction, just for pleasure. And so I had bookshelves and bookshelves. We threw so many away too. And and Prabhupada, if you ever hear one of his lectures, you're like, oh, you don't even have time to read fiction. There's so much good stuff in spiritual books. And when you actually start to see it, there's so many spiritual books that you're like, oh my God, in my whole lifetime, I won't be able to. What's going on?
Switch it.
Sorry. Oh, technical difficulties.
Yeah, 1 second.
Okay.
One of these buttons. It's not switching. I don't know. Oh, it did.
We're good?
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, there's like a plethora of books that literally you can spend a lifetime reading, and I don't even know how people get through some of the stuff that they do. So because it's so precise and scientific and laid out in a very detailed manner, and so the pursuant, us, in whatever way we want to pursue our knowledge, we can, and to whatever degree we can. So that's the theoretical part. And then same way from a practical perspective, there's a very easy way to do it. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay. So that's the lab part. Okay. So what are the three, or let me ask you guys, Bhagavad Gita, if you had to sum up the philosophy in a few sound bites, what are the main topics of the Bhagavad Gita? We don't want to, go through the, yeah, please.
You are not the body. You are the soul.
Okay. Who am I? That answers that question, correct? I'm the body, or I'm not the body, I'm the soul, right? Okay, what else? Exactly, that's part of it. But the other main, so if who we are, who am I? The second piece was who's God, right? The Bhagavad Gita, Krishna describes who he is, right? So that's the, if you, we're just really broad, right? Obviously there's subsections in there. And then the third is, what is our relationship with him, right? So who am I? Eternal nature, indestructible, unchanging. That means I'm the soul and not the body. Yeah? Ross has got a couple of texts that speak to that, right? And then the second thing is, who's God? And God is the super soul. So if we're the minute soul, God is the super soul, right? And so we're qualitatively the same, but quantitatively we are not. That's the learning of the Bhagavad Gita. Makes sense, right? And then the third is, what is our relationship? And how do we cultivate that relationship? That's the third and final main theme of the Bhagavad Gita. Yeah, we agree? Pretty simple. Obviously, there's so many layers underneath it that Krishna goes through, or actually, Krishna's so, I mean, he does such a great job of walking us through these, you know, it's a sequential step up to be able to understand that we're a soul, how we're connected to him because he's a super soul as well. And then what is our dharma is to have service, serve Krishna. Our constituted position is a servant. And I'm sure some of the speakers talked about the fact that we're all, one of my favorite ways to really understand the service mentality is we're serving something all the time, whether we know it or not. We may not call it service, but we're serving something, whether it's serving our senses, to serving our bosses, to serving our children, right? We're always serving somebody. So, so that's a very natural tendency for us, right? So it's not a really big leap of faith to say that to serve God is truly our constitutional position, right? Because we also talked about the spiritual world and the material world, how in the material world, basically it's just a perverted inversion of the spiritual world. So if Krishna's pleasure seeking and we're qualitatively like Krishna, then we must be pleasure seeking, correct? The only difference is we seek pleasure in not the right way. So so the final theoretical piece is how to be able to serve Krishna. How do we derive the most pleasure by serving Krishna? Okay, fair? Anyone want to add anything as it relates to the Bhagavad Gita or our theoretical knowledge? No? Okay. So we kind of talked about Gyan, right? Knowledge alone will not liberate us. So we were talking about how we need complete knowledge, and that complete knowledge is done through both theoretical and practical. And it won't get us to cultivate the relationship that Krishna wants us to have. And obviously the end result is we want love for Krishna. So then what? So Vijnana, if you've heard of that term, basically it's transformative action. So it's action, knowledge and action basically is another way of looking at it. It's practical understanding, experimental knowledge, actions that transform the heart and create an intimate relationship with Krishna. And it culminates in love for God beyond mere intellectual understanding. That's it. So I don't know why you guys are here, but I don't know if you know you were here. But what we're teaching is it's the theory, how to love God, and then the practical way how to love God. Okay? So once we Krishna establishes in the Bhagavad Gita that our true nature is to establish that loving relationship with him, then what's so beautiful about the process, the spiritual process, is it's a step-by-step guide how to create that love. And what's beautiful about that is you can take that process and almost apply it to our material relationships as well. So that's what we're going to That's what we're going to dive into. So those are demerits. How many? So usually in my meetings, I give out a demerit for a minute late, so that's 15 demerits. Welcome, guys. So how do we do the practical, the laboratory work? It's done through 9 processes of devotional service or bhakti. And that's what we're going to talk about. Those are the way, these 9 processes is how we can cultivate that service relationship with Krishna. And what's really nice about this is we're going to go through these 9, and it can be done with, you can develop that love, whether it's done through one of those processes or all of the processes. That's also beautiful and very flexible. So hearing, you guys have heard that Sarvanam. Srila Prabhupada, Sarvanam means hearing. Unless you hear, you cannot describe. What you shall describe. If you do not know anything about Supreme Lord, then how can you describe? Therefore, hearing is the first item. And then the whole Vedic literature is called hearing. So basically, this is, hearing can be done in many different ways. So today you're hearing, listening to lectures, obviously reading, all those constitute hearing. Rasa spent a lot of time on chanting, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Just 2 forms really, right? Is meditative, japa chanting, and also kirtan or congregational chanting. Remembering, were you guys aware of that? Like constantly keeping the Lord in one's thoughts. So let's talk about it practically. I'm not sure that I can do it like Prahlad Maharaj, but so how do we remember the Lord, right? So there's, so in your home, if you have pictures of Krishna and you walk by the hall, oh, okay, there's Krishna. That's one way to constantly remember him, is if you have his pictures around your house, right? What are some other ways that maybe can help us remember Krishna?
Peacock feather.
What's that?
Peacock feather.
Peacock feather.
Peacock
Peacock,
feather.
exactly. Peacock. So his paraphernalia, that will remind us, like so a peacock feather, maybe a flute that's in the corner of your house or something like that. Great. Symbols, right? What are other ways we can remember Krishna?
Strength.
Strength. Understanding that strength comes from Krishna. Yes. Yes. His pastimes, right? So all these things, whatever, there's so many things that can help us remember that Krishna is God, right? And you can kind of remember it. And so what they say is a fully realized soul remembers Krishna all the time. And when I first heard that, I was like, that is just, I don't know, how do you arbitrarily do that? Like, I can't think of Krishna arbitrarily like that. There's no way I can do that, right? And so as we start our journey, all these processes of devotional service that we do, they help us to remember Krishna. So it's very scientific in that manner. And slowly but surely, you start think of, you look at the beautiful moon, you're like, oh my God, oh Krishna, that's so gorgeous. Oh, you just remember Krishna, right? And so it happens like that. In nature, it's easy for us to say, oh my God, like how majestic, how beautiful is this, right? Even when we see something like maybe that's not in nature, but it's man-made, like architecture in Chicago, these beautiful buildings. How can we tie that to Krishna? Because that's not necessarily nature. How can we see Krishna in some of these architecture buildings? Yes.
Well, like you said, everybody serves somebody at one point, and in that way, everybody serves Krishna.
Yeah.
So the architect who built that was doing directly or indirectly serves Krishna.
Okay. You can do it that way. Awesome. Yes.
It has some beauty. Although beauty is subjective, it is inspired by something, and
Right.
that inspiration comes from Krishna.
Yeah, exactly, you guys are both right on the way. So basically, whatever we offer in our occupations, that knowledge for that ultimately comes from Krishna. The inspiration, you're manifesting that, you're offering. I mean, anything that a human brain can think of ultimately comes from the fact that Krishna gave us the ability to think that way, right? So, how many of us And it depends. I think there's people on both sides. When something good happens to us, who says, "Oh my God, thank Krishna, thank God." Okay. When something bad happens to us, how many of you say, "Oh my God, what happened here?" Right? So some people it's like both, but you can in both instances you can think of Krishna, right? When something good happens and something bad happens. So that's different ways to remember Krishna. Yeah, and that's one of the processes. Any questions on it? You guys can just jump in with questions whenever you want. Yes, you should.
So you brought up the point about remembering in the highs and lows, but what about the majority of the time where it's in between? What would you recommend?
We talked about symbols. So if we have pictures in our home, that helps us to remember Krishna. But if we dedicate, as we start on our spiritual journey and as we mature on our spiritual journey, we start to realize that literally everything that we do can be in service of Krishna, right? Like everything. You raising your children can be done in service of Krishna, right? Not all the time, but yeah. But even your education, you guys, it's a service. How is that a service to Krishna? Because you're trying to live out your dharma, right? You're trying to live out your dharma. And I'm not going to get into dharma. I wanted to do dharma. That would have been really cool because I heard a really good lecture about how to do that. But your material occupation absolutely can be offered to Krishna because the monies that you gain from it can be utilized in the service of Krishna's too. Yeah. All right. Okay. Serving the Lord's lotus feet. So basically, this is serving. Period. Whether it's directly, like here, lotus feet of Krishna, like actual obeisances in the temple and things like that, or doing direct service for him, or it can be indirect service, right? So, what are some examples, maybe, of indirect service? Because I'm not sure that we have direct service sometimes. What are some examples of how we can serve Krishna indirectly? Yes. Sharing. Yes.
Dropping home after VBS.
Dropping home. Dropping people off. Yes, exactly. What we're doing here, just together, sharing, answering questions, right? So we're doing all these things, right? So any type of service, direct or indirect, helps us in our cultivation of that loving relationship with Krishna. That's the most important thing. And I don't know, you should have done it. I don't know if you were there, but we were in Naperville I think it was probably about 2 years ago, and it was Bhakti Vasudeva Maharaj was there. And somebody asked a really good question. They're like, I love doing service. I love washing dishes. I love serving prasadam at temple. I love service. But chanting, not so much. And so the question was like, what to do? Like my heart is really into service, but it's not into chanting. And so if there's a Rath Yatra or a big festival going on, and I have a lot of service, is it okay for me to skip my rounds, right, and go on? And he came up with this most brilliant answer, and it's always stuck in my heart. And he said, the fact that you love service is great, but just remember, all the service that you do, it just prepares you to be able to chant. So all the service that we're doing eventually helps us to constantly remember Krishna by our chanting. And it's a beautiful way of looking at it. So as we cultivate our service, as we volunteer for the service, and more importantly, as that service becomes available to us, we should absolutely jump at that opportunity to do some service for Krishna, because ultimately what it's going to do is going to help us to chant his names, whether it's, develop that taste to chant his names in japa, or whether when we chant in a kirtan, that our mood is such that we're truly connected with Krishna at that time. So service helps us to chant and chant with devotion, if you will, and that connection. Okay? All right, fifth, deity worship. Plain and simple. Okay, and deity worship can be done very extravagantly and formally. So that can be in the temple, you see the the pujaris, they're very qualified to be able to offer, worship to the Lords directly, right? So let me ask you a question. How can you at home do some form of deity worship? It's a little harder one, right?
I mean, basically, you wake up in the morning. If you have a temple at home, small, it does not have to be very lavish kind
Right.
of thing. You have a small temple, deities at home. Just pray in the morning before sleeping, and while you are in the day, while you are having food, offer it to the deities. That's just
Exactly.
what you can do.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be very extravagant. You can as simple as praying or offering some sort of like an incense, even food, like you said. You can have a small altar. You can have an elaborate altar. So this Kartik was inspired by Sachinanda Maharaj. He said to do worship to Tulsi. So we did Arti to Tulsi in the morning, right? So that's another way of doing, and so that's deity worship, right? So that's one way of, again, practical example of developing that love for God, right? So when you actually stand in front of whatever deities you have or a picture that you have, and you're offering something to them, something magical starts to happen to our heart, right? Just that physical process of taking the time to understand, like for me, oh, okay, so I've got to understand what am I supposed to do, because there's a process. Oh, and then the second, why do we do that? So then you learn a little something, and then it kind of sticks with you, right? And so deity worship can also help transform your heart. That's why some of these like dedicated pujaris are there at 4:30 in the morning, and you're like, well, how do they even? It's their heart is transformed. It's to them, it's like, oh my God, I can't wait to get there. I'm sure it's not every day like that, but the point is, you get attracted to that type of service, and it is the act of that service that changes your heart. Yeah. Okay. Praying. That's pretty simple, right? But that's devotional service. Why do you think that praying is devotional service? Yes, Krish.
I guess like it builds faith, or it also reminds us like there is someone beyond us who can control things that are not within our control, and we're putting these kinds of situations within divinity's hands. So praying is just the act of like acknowledging that I'm relying on your help and I can't do this by myself.
Perfect. Nailed it. Yep. There's a higher being. So whatever I have in my life, both material and spiritual, ultimately comes from a source, and that's God, right? So once we establish a consistent form of prayer, you can see how what Grish said, which is that ultimately everything comes from Krishna or God, manifests in our heart. So if you pray every morning, so there's people that I know that every morning or every evening before bed, a lot of Christians do that too. They say a simple prayer, and so what that does is if you repeat it, the kids, it's all about repetition, and so once you start to do it, it transforms your heart without you even knowing it. Right? Consistency. Fair enough. Okay. Executing orders. What does that mean? Whose orders? Hanuman's orders? I'm not sure if he's going to give us orders. What does that mean? Okay, so probably what this really means is listening to our spiritual master. Okay, so those of us who are not initiated, doesn't mean you don't listen to us, if they tell you something, but it's practically speaking, you listen to your spiritual master, because the spiritual master understands where you're at spiritually, and they can guide you into until you ultimately get the full goal of prema, right? But how else? We're not initiated, so how do we apply this in our daily lives? Yes.
by fulfilling our duties.
Okay, that's one. Yeah, that's a great. That's a good way of doing it. Following our dharma, if you will, right? Okay. Also, you can listen to you could follow the instructions, and I'm just gonna say because you guys are right in front of me. They do a great job of listening to me. So so like when I'll ask for service and things like that, that we need help or something. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a spiritual master. It just can be somebody senior to you. It can be somebody that's your equal too. So when you start to participate in devotional service with collaborating with other people, that's kind of like, oh yeah, let's go do this. Or I mean, when Sri Dharanand grabs you guys to grab the prashad from downstairs on Sunday, that's following instructions. So that's what does that do? What is that creating, you think? Humility, humbleness. Yeah. And we'll find out as you guys progress on your spiritual journey that probably that the false ego is the hardest one. To become completely humble is so hard to do. It can take so much time. And so by listening to somebody that is your spiritual master or senior devotees or just people or devotees in general, you can get a lot of mercy, and you can also humble yourself, right? And humility is a key component to eventually get love for Krishna. Okay, serving as a friend. Okay, so that's how many can like imagine Krishna as your friend? Yeah. It's Krishna Balaram, that relationship is probably the best depiction of a friendship with Krishna, and obviously Arjun as well, right? And sometimes it can be very casual, right? It's like, oh my God, Krishna, what is going on here? Well, now what am I going to do, right? So why do you think it's about? Why is that important, Yashodanandan, about being a friend with Krishna? Why is that part of the 9 process? Does anybody know that?
So, wait, were you asking me directly?
Oh yeah, or anybody who wants to answer, but I was asking you.
Okay. So just having a friendly disposition toward of just developing an intimacy of relationship, because when let's say I invest in that relationship in a more intimate way, it opens up new ways to being able to serve with confidence that this is pleasing to the object of service.
Very eloquently said. Thank you. You had a hand up?
Maybe we can share things to our friend that we can't share to anyone.
Right.
So God being our friend is a good thing because we can literally ask him, tell him, he can give us any sort of advice that we need at that exact moment.
Right. It must be very important because even in the Damodar prayers, you know that shloka about anybody who worships Krishna without awe and reverence, right? Without awe and reverence, right? So I always found it fascinating. It's like, oh my God, my concept of God was always awe and reverence. I'm like, wait a minute, what's this all about? And it is. It's about building an intimacy with Krishna. It's the closeness. You guys are both right. And what Krishna truly wants is we're qualitatively exactly like Krishna, right? It's the quantitatively that's different, obviously. And so what Krishna wants is a relationship with us. And this is where the teachings that we believe in or our Acharya Prabhupada really brought to the West is this concept of God as personal, right? And so if God is not personal to you like a friend, it's hard. You always have that awe and reverence type of relationship, right? And so that's why this, I'm not exactly sure, but my understanding is the reason that that's in there as part of the devotional service from one of the paths to devotional service is because it's an important concept. it's an important concept to personalize Krishna, right? Personalize God in our lives. And it's a hard one to get to, like, to say, oh my God, God is a friend. Like, I never thought of it that way. I always thought of it as like, oh, if I need something, I gotta go to him, right? So your relationship with your parents is like, I gotta go to dad to go get something, right? It's when your children get older and you start to see that your relationship starts to turn from a parental relationship to more of a friendship. And the older the kids get, the more like friends that you end up becoming with your own children. And it's the same concept. So as our relationship develops with Krishna, ultimately it can culminate in a friendship. Does that make sense? Right? It's a harder one for me. At least for me, it was a harder one for me to understand. So that's where no, that's not number 9. Okay, and then number 9, complete surrender. So what does that mean? I know we touched base in terms of surrender a few times. And there's a reference in chapter 11, text 55, right? You guys can read it. My dear Arjun, one who is engaged in my pure devotional service, free from the contaminations of previous activities and from mental speculation, who is friendly to every living entity, certainly comes to me. So what does that mean, surrender? Now that you guys have had we even talked about surrender, I think, in one of the classes. Yes.
Acting in complete, I would say, sync with the Supreme. Like, there is no you anymore.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
So it's like, if you think this is good for me, hey, I like this, it's not good, it's bad. That comes with your idea of you. But acting in complete sync, that everything is gone.
Okay. Thank you. Good. Anybody else? Yeah.
Does that mean that everything is written in destiny? So like go with the flow?
Go with the flow. So complete give into whatever Krishna wants to happen in your life. Is that what you're saying? Okay, good. Anybody else? Surrender. And there's not a right answer per se, because it's very personal too on the surrender side. There is a foundation that we can talk about. Yes, Harish.
I guess just like being able to, see Krishna in everyone, pretty much. Because that essentially you're always serving Krishna. If you see Krishna in everyone, there's no difference between every living entity. So you're just like acknowledging that every single living entity comes from Krishna, and you're serving. That's your desire, really.
Okay, good. Anybody else? What surrender means to him? Yes.
I like his answer. I'd like to continue with that.
Okay.
Similar to that, see Krishna in everyone is what he said. See yourself in everyone else. It boils down to, because when we see Krishna in someone else, we need to understand that we won't do anything that is harmful to them, which is equally harmful to us, because harm is treated or defined the same way in our minds. We
Right.
start seeing ourselves in everyone, then we would only do that to them, which we would expect to be done to us.
Very nice. So basically your concept is, hey, once we recognize that we're all souls and we don't want to hurt the souls, and so me being a soul and him being a soul and Krishna being a soul, we have things in common. Yeah, good. Anybody else? Yes, Rasa.
Depending on him for everything.
Depending on him for everything. Yep. So it could also be complete surrender is, for me, it's, you've pretty much given the concept of what makes me happy, and you start to live your life to say, what would make Krishna happy, right? It's a concept that I had it's one of the hardest ones for me to really wrap my, again, from a practical perspective. I'm like, oh my God, I like to go play golf. How does Krishna like to play golf? I don't understand how that's going to happen, right? So working on that one still. But it is, theoretically, this is a theoretical piece for me right now. Practically speaking, I'm in and out of it. But theoretically, what it means is to when I start to put Krishna's needs first, and someone can say, well, like, don't I get something out of this? And so recently, I listened to a lecture, and the concept was conveyed to me, conveyed as follows. So when you offer food to Krishna, right? Do you eat it also? Right? As prasad. So did you give your food to Krishna or did you eat it? Both. And so that's the beautiful concept Krishna wants us to understand. It's in full surrender. What he's actually saying is when you start to put my needs first, it's actually your needs that you're putting first. You just don't know it. So we think our material needs are what we want, right? And then the concept of falling in love with Krishna and serving him and fully surrendering to him is you learn that spiritually serving Krishna is the fulfillment that you're looking for. It gives you the highest pleasure. Okay? Does that make sense? So, like I said, there's a spectrum and we're going to be on that line, but we're talking about understanding theoretically what we're trying to accomplish, philosophy wise, and you have to have that. Who can walk into a lab of a class, you guys have absolute experience in this, without reading the text associated with that and do well in the lab? How many of you guys do it? It'd be hard, right? And let's go the other way around, right? We already talked about that. If you just have theoretical knowledge without the lab, it doesn't sink in completely, does it? All right? And so, same thing here. We're starting to understand things theoretically. That's very, very important for us to be able to do what? To do the practical piece, which will take us a lifetime to do. But we can incorporate now. That's what Rasa talked about last week so much was, how do we do this? So we just talked about 9 ways to doing this, right? You think you guys can incorporate some? Yeah? Okay. Somebody want to read this for me? Grish, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. In the Bhagavad Gita, this practice of Krishna consciousness is described as Raja Vidya, the king of all erudition, Raja Guyam, the most confidential system of spiritual realization, Pavitra, the purest of all that is pure, Susukham, very happily performed, and Avyayam, inexhaustible. Those who have taken to the most sublime bhakti yoga system, this practice of devotional service and transcendental love of Krishna, can testify to how they are nicely enjoying its happy and easy execution.
Okay, so basically what Prabhupada's saying is it's actually enjoyable. Yeah, this process. And then let me ask you, I don't want to give it away. So out of those 9, which one's the best in order to develop that love for Krishna, that prema that we want? Which one do you think is the best?
Complete surrender.
Complete surrender. Okay, that's a complete. Yes.
Seeing him as a friend.
Seeing me as a friend. Okay. Anybody else? Chanting. Okay. Anybody else? It's kind of a trick question. Yes.
Can you repeat the question? What is the most important?
Yeah. So we talked about 10 processes.
That will be hearing.
Hearing. Okay. These are all important. Okay, but here's what I want. So, Bhavesh, can you read that?
When one is firmly fixed in devotional service, whether he executes one or many processes of devotional service, the waves of love of Godhead will awaken.
Okay. So we got 9 options. If you love to do deity worship, what this is saying is that alone can awaken the love for God for you. Okay. Or if you want to dabble a little bit in everything, that will help develop. This is one of my favorite quotes. Like we had to really look for this because a lot of people don't know. It's like, oh, well, which one should I do? It's whatever your heart is attracted to first and foremost. That's the most important. And then you'll start to realize that, oh, incorporating all of these processes is also fun, because then you give, there's a little variety in it. Yeah. So you can do any one of these guys, right? If you just simply go to the temple and pay obeisance to the deities there, that's devotional service. So how many of you guys gone to the temple in the last few weeks, right? Well, you're doing devotional service, right? You're doing devotional service. And once you get, a little bit more into it, somebody will show you one day to say, okay, how to pay obeisance. I'm like, there's a way to do it? I just see people laying down. Oh, there's a way. There's always a way. There's always something extra, right? Okay, so thank you for that. So I wanted to end with this. So how do I play this thing?
Free from all reaction. Enjoy. Why should we not? Spiritual life does not mean. Why should we not? Void of enjoyment. There is no difficulty. It is full of enjoyment. Difficulty. Rather, we are seeking enjoyment of pleasure. Ananda. The whole thing is Ananda. Ananda means that if by doing that, Yoga, if we become free from all reaction, then why should we not do it? Why should we not do it? There is no difficulty, there is no question of difficulty, rather it is a thing of pleasure, Ananda. The whole thing is Ananda. Ananda means pleasure, enjoyment. Spiritual life does not mean that void of enjoyment. No, it is full of enjoyment. We are seeking after enjoyment. But that enjoyment is hampered by our material existence. We do not know. We are trying to squeezing out the senses and trying to have material pleasure. This is nonsense. Because we do not know what is spiritual life.
Okay, that's that. So basically, how many of you guys have heard spiritual life described as seeking pleasure? Right? Because we always think of seeking pleasure as, give me my time with my phone because I just had, a full day of classes. Let me veg out, right? Or whatever, right? For me, golf, right? Whatever it is, right? But spiritual life in itself, as we develop our understanding, which is the philosophy, and as we start to practice what we talked about today, the 9 processes of bhakti, eventually it becomes very, very pleasurable to us. You start to develop, you heard words like taste. I'm like, what is taste? Nectar. I'm like, really? Like, how does that happen? How that happens is once you start taking up the 9 processes of devotion service, any one of them, and practice them on a consistent basis over a period of time, it will come. Now, sometimes what happens, we're very enthusiastic in the beginning, and so we take up, the process very seriously, and then what happens is then we have this lack of motivation to do it. First of all, it's a natural process, and second of all, what that's telling you is, okay, so my path is going to be a little bit slower as we go on this, and that slow and steady path of practicing some of these things will eventually lead you to the taste of doing things at a higher level, like chanting, going from 2 rounds to 16 rounds. It will happen, but you got to let it happen from the heart, right? You can't manufacture it. And you can try it. I mean, it happens, but eventually you'll come to your equilibrium point where your heart will match the level of service you'll be able to do. And just think of it as that's your journey, it's your process. For some people, it's immediate, like Yashodananda. And for me, it takes me 20 years, right? I'm still trying to figure it out. So the thing is, and that too is an important understanding. It's just being content to where you are and not comparing yourself in your spiritual path. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you, guys. Any questions? Yes.
Looking from Krishna's perspective, does he expect us to remember him every time of the day? Or like for some reason I forgot to chant his name today. Is he like keeping track?
No. Krishna knows his energy way better than we do. This material energy is such that it makes us forget. Krishna knows that. And our job here in this material world is to eventually remember. So it's a process. So if you forget today, that's okay. Remember him tomorrow. So that's another thing about the friend thing. Friends are a lot more lenient than your father or mother, right? So another reason to remember him as a friend, right? So no, absolutely not. Krishna is not keeping tabs on you and going to punish you. That's not it. Yes. Good questions. Anybody else? Be about what we're talking about, or anything that we learned this semester. Okay. Yes.
You mentioned that about senior or junior with respect to devotees. How can someone see? Because since it's a transcendental thing, multiple lifetimes, you cannot ascertain whether a soul is senior or junior purely based on the age or how many years they have started it. Because in a sense itself, they might be, that Krishna allows you to carry your spirituality from one birth to the next. So someone who might be super young might be super advanced, but someone who might be old might be just starting their journey.
Yep, Rishabh, you answered your own questions. It's not predicated on age at all, or even how long you've been practicing. There's 3 kinds, right? I forget the Sanskrit names. I always forget the Sanskrit names, but there's symptoms of each of the 3. There's symptoms. And so you recognize that person. It's a really good question. You recognize where that person is, whether they're equal to you, junior, or senior, based on the symptoms that they exhibit. Spiritual symptoms, right? So the highest one could be, they're absorbed in Krishna 24/7, right? Or they're, when they offer, you can feel it when they're worshiping Krishna, you can see them emotionally connected to Krishna. Their hairs stand up, they start to cry, tears come out of their eyes. Those are symptoms of somebody that's purified. But also the other 2, I forget the names. If somebody. There you go. Okay, and so there's symptoms from both. And so instead of identifying it from a bodily conception, you observe, you interact, and then you reciprocate appropriately, right? No, you're absolutely right. They even say that be very careful when a new devotee comes to Krishna, because they may be new, so to speak, but they may be super, super advanced. And I've seen that. Right? We met people that all of a sudden take to Krishna consciousness, and boom, it's like, how did that happen? They're just very advanced from the get-go. Yeah, good question. Yes.
Just 3-4 slides back, there is a sloka. Is this one? So there is a word mental speculation. Could you please elucidate more about that term mental speculation?
Okay.
Not properly patterned.
Yeah. So the text that you're referring to is chapter 1155. My dear Arjun, one who is engaged in my pure devotional service, free from the contaminations of previous activities and from mental speculation, who is friendly to every living entity, certainly comes to me. Okay, so mental speculation. So what do you guys think that is? Okay, so let me do this way. You guys are into now. See, I don't know enough even about technology to ask you a relevant question. So it'd be something like your there's a precise way of doing something, and a novice like myself goes, well, I think it gets done this way. That's mental speculation. So arbitrarily, us bringing our own past whatever's right experiences into and trying to say, well, you know, really what Krishna is saying here, right? So that's mental speculation. The point here is to follow in the footsteps of our acharyas and our scriptures, and stick to it, and don't start to invent ways of interpreting certain things. So even interpretation should be done in conjunction with somebody that's advanced enough to be able to help you interpret it, right? You read a shloka, and then you can easily say, oh, this is what this means. This is why there's how many, like hundreds of of iterations of the Bhagavad Gita that people have written. And Prabhupada does not mince words. When you read his Bhagavad Gita and you read the purports, he will tell you, he's like, these guys, these rascals are interpreting the shlokas to fit whatever, whatever their aim is, right? And so that's what he says. In order to guard against that, how do you guard against that then? Well, how you guard against that is to take to understand what the acharyas have said about how they've interpreted the shlokas in a disciplined succession, all the way from Krishna down. That's why it's important to have a spiritual master, is because they help you interpret so you don't concoct definitions or meanings of certain slokas yourself. Does that help? Okay. Yeah, of course. Yes.
If you want to add step number 10, what would?
What kind of question? All right, no, it's a really good question. So what he's saying is, now, what else can we do, right? If I understand your question. Step 10 is wherever you feel right now that you're connected with Krishna in whatever capacity that you think that helps you connect with him, right? That's also part of devotional service, right? But I guarantee it's going to fall on one of these 9s. Like for me, it's, being in my room and having my books and stuff like that, but that helps me remember him, right? So that's a hard question. Anybody else wants to answer that? Yes, you should.
Maybe just thinking about it from a slightly different angle. Some people say that I experience God the most when I'm taking drugs. Like some people say it like that.
Okay.
And so I'm just introducing that as like
just remember, he introduced it, not me. Go ahead.
Just that in the desire to find that piece that resonates, that as Mohit Prabhu was saying, it's always under sort of a framework of these 9 processes and carefully avoiding the mental speculation tendencies. So that's where like the guidance becomes so important, because there's unlimited ways to make something up.
Yeah, no, this is really good. You actually brought up a really good point. Okay, so that intoxication point. So I'm paraphrasing, so please don't hold me to exactly, but there was a time when in France, I believe it was, there was a drunkard that came into the temple or somehow got association with Prabhupada, and he lunged at Prabhupada's feet, to try to take shelter. And so all the devotees were like, get this, bum, wino away from him. He was a drunkard on wine. And story is that he ended up becoming a great devotee eventually. But the process, he couldn't give up wine in the beginning. And so Prabhupada some people say, is quoted as saying, just offer the wine to Krishna, right? So not much different from what Prabhu was saying is, sometimes you have to look at it on a spectrum, this spiritual journey that we're on. And so even if it doesn't look right, like offering wine to Krishna doesn't ask us to offer wine, but in your heart, if you even offer that wine to Krishna, what are you actually saying? that I recognize that everything comes from you, right? Right? So that's a little bit of God consciousness there. So even if maybe it's not the perfect way, but that's a great example of how some people may unknowingly be doing devotional service and they don't even know it yet. So that's probably another way to do it. Yeah, probably not the right way. Anyway, do you have a way? Because you asked that question, it was a very unique question.
No, I don't.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? Yes.
I wanted to answer the question.
Oh, he wants to answer. Okay, go for it.
So if we are looking for a 10th way, which means we're looking for probably one more way, which means one way is already available in the 1 to 9 ways. So we can pick one and make that the 10th one. If we know where we want to get.
So you're saying take one of the 9 and then make it a 10th?
Call it 10. Because the
Okay, we can do that.
Why would someone come with 9?
Yeah.
If we ask questions for the 9th one, then 8th one becomes the question.
Yeah.
Then the first one is the answer.
Yeah, you could do that. You guys, thank you so much for your for this whole semester and coming and on all that good stuff and putting up with me. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk to you guys about something. Hopefully, I didn't make a fool of myself. Okay.
Okay, so for the next 10 minutes or so, we'll be engaging in one of the other devotional services mentioned. And for me personally, that's my 10th, Kirtan. So just to reiterate, we'll be reciting the Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. And it'll be a call and response. So once I say the melody, then everyone can respond, and feel free to close your eyes and be in that mood with Krishna, however you have that relationship with him, just kind of immerse in that experience. And now for another process of bhakti, eating prasadam.
That's the 10th.
That's the 10.
Yeah. So we'll be forming a line here. So please, if we can start doing so. And,
It was about this big and it was yellow.
How are you guys?
Yeah, it was like yellowish.
Mani, do you have any announcements?